And I guess let me just start with any questions that any of you have specifically about presenting in an online format. And again, you're welcome to write them in the chat, or you can unmute, whatever you're more comfortable with.
I do have one question. As far as presenting, I've spoken with my mentor regarding the research project that we have, and he has said traditionally in these situations where conferences are virtual, they were required to record a video. Now this is going to be live through Zoom, correct? No video?
That's a great question. I'll actually take that one since it goes to the format of the conference. For the annual research conference, there are actually two ways you can present. So if you are going to be presenting a poster, you will pre-record that and you will present the poster virtually. We just met about this morning. We're going to be using Microsoft Stream that the university owns to pull the posters together, and then we'll post those on our digital commons site. So if you've been to the ARC site, you see there that digital commons site, just like last year, that will allow you to go through and like click on a poster and it will automatically play, okay? So posters, yes, those will be pre-recorded on stream, and we'll ask that we have the posters about a week in advance. We can make sure that they're up. Now, if you are going to do an oral presentation, if you are going to be reading a paper, giving a PowerPoint, you know, that 10 to 12 minute space, then that's going to be live and it will be on Zoom.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Does that help? Do you know which way you're going, paper or poster?
I don't yet. We haven't fully decided, but I appreciate that.
Does everybody know the difference between paper and poster? Is that something you'd like to learn a little more about?
Sure.
So with a paper, typically you are on a panel with 2 or 3 other people. And actually, JC, I'm going to let you talk because you've been on plenty of paper panels. So why don't you tell everyone about what a paper panel looks like and maybe what's different when you move to a virtual format of giving a paper live?
Of course. So a paper, I've only presented paper, so I don't have much experience with the oral, the poster ones. But a paper, you write your paper, and whoever's running the conference will put you with similar, like they'll put you into categories, and you'll be placed with similar like papers and like people who have research in like your field essentially, and you'll kind of be on a panel and you'll take turns reading your papers, and then after you've all read your papers, there'll be time for y'all to answer questions. And that's when the audience can ask questions. You can ask the other panelists questions, and the questions can be directed to like specific people who read their paper or the group in general. And that's kind of how it goes.
Any big changes when you switch to the virtual format of giving a paper?
Of course, there's always the chance of technical difficulties, and like maybe some people can't hear you. It's not just speaking a little louder, but you have to like double check to make sure beforehand and practice to make sure your software is working. That is the big trick in my opinion, but that's really the only difference. The questions can still come through and you can still see people's faces, but yep, just double checking your software essentially.
The other thing I've seen in attending some undergraduate research conferences is I think students are less likely to turn their camera on. So you may actually be presenting to a lot of black screens, which can be either really liberating because it's not as nerve-wracking to see all those faces, or it can be even more nerve-wracking because you don't know if people are actually listening. So that is something to kind of be aware of in the virtual world. Typically, if I'm on a panel, I'll have my screen on because I want to, sort of feel that connection with somebody. So again, it's up to everybody's preference of whether they want to have their screen on or not. Some people think it's distracting and they just want to see the person talking. I like to know that I'm not just talking into the void. So that is one thing to remember. The other thing I always remind students about posters versus presentations, virtual or not, is that with if you're doing an oral presentation, you are going to prepare in advance, but you literally have until 2 minutes before you go on to be tweaking everything. So that's always something good to factor into, again, your work flow. We will ask for posters to be done in advance. Sonali has joined us. She's one of our other panelists, and luckily Sonali is a poster presenter. Sonali is in the biology department, and she's presented at the Georgia Undergraduate Research Conference this fall, a virtual poster. So Sonali, can you tell us a little bit about the process of doing that presentation, putting together the poster in advance, putting it online, doing the recording, all of that sort of thing?
Yes, so for presenting at the conference, what we did was started with the abstract, of course, and then as we build up to the actual conference itself, we had to prepare a poster in advance that we would essentially talk over. So it's not like an actual like virtual meeting per se. It's more of a video in advance that you upload, and it's like a group of like in a playlist where you get to go through it, and people will come in and listen to each of the videos and comment down their commentary on the video. So it's a little bit different than an actual live conference itself. And preparing in advance gives you like a chance to be able to have all the information prepared for you. However, there's also that, like you talked about with even like the virtual conferences itself, it's a lot more disconnected than you would get for like an actual live conference, I would say.
Great. Sonali, you brought up a great point, and that's with the posters. You know, JC talked about having those live questions that come at you at the end of an oral presentation. Typically in a poster situation, you would give like your 3-minute overview of your posters and people would ask you questions back. Because it's all pre-recorded, the back and forth is actually a chat, and we'll do the same thing for ARC. So we'll ask that students be at the poster session. Everything will already be recorded, but we'll ask that you'll be online. Usually it's between like 12 and 1 o'clock, so that you can answer real-time questions from people. So there will be a chat box where people can ask you questions about your presentation and you can chat back. Sonali, I know you did that. Did you get many questions? I think I commented and a couple other people.
I think I got 2. So it's a little bit less, you know, it feels a little bit less personal, I would say, when you're presenting through that. So it's a little bit of a different thing. And that's the only time I've ever presented directly. So it feels weird when you think about like how you thought a conference would go. And it is a little bit more disconnected now because of that virtual aspect of it, specifically with posters.
Yeah, now we will leave your posters up if you decide to do a poster on Digital Commons for a while. So you may get, you know, after the event, but we're hoping to try to encourage people. We put posters in the prime spot, 12 to 1, when most people don't have classes, when you're eating lunch, so that you can get some of that conversation back in real time. So, okay, great. Other questions, Rachel or Kat? And if not, I have a couple of questions I'll ask the panel. Okay, so another question that I have for our 2 panelists is, what advice would you give to a student who's presenting at a virtual conference for the first time? So are there any like secret tips or tricks that, you know, you did or you wish you had done and plan to do for the next conference? JC, we'll start with you.
I know most conferences provide you breakfast and lunch. Like, I had to wake up earlier and make my own breakfast, and it kind of like threw me off a little bit because like I was super nervous to like be presenting, but then I had to like wake up and make my own breakfast. It was just odd. And I made sure to make my lunch the day before, so I could just run into my kitchen, grab it, come back and listen to the presentation or like the lunch session like during that time. And like my main tips other than that would just be kind of run through the same like schedule you have for yourself. So I print my papers out, make notes like where to like pause or mark out certain things. Like I still do all of those things, but just it was for paper presentations very similar to in person, but just yeah, make your breakfast and your lunch or you will be hungry.
That's a great point. I think, unfortunately, in the pandemic and the virtual world, our time is both, we have more time and less time, if that makes sense. So I feel like I'm always running in between meetings more so than I used to be. So yeah, I think that's a wonderful point to remember. Bathroom breaks too. Remember, we have to actually get up and go to the bathroom and stretch and all of that. So it's good to kind of work those in and be prepared. One thing also you might think about is backgrounds and presentation. I think we're all getting really, really good at that. So making sure that you have a good background that's not too distracting, and making sure you're maintaining eye contact with the camera when you're presenting, right? So if I want to look at you all, I kind of look down, and if I want to look at the camera, I look up. So those are always good things to kind of practice. And I think everyone has a great background right now, so you're all doing kudos there. But yeah, just making sure your background is set up so that you present professionally as much as you can. And I think a lot of people are using virtual for that very reason. So that's always an option as well. Sonali, how about you? What tips or tricks do you have after presenting at a virtual conference?
I would say to definitely keep up with deadlines or any information from specifically the conference itself or from your mentor. Definitely keep track and communicate with them if you have any issues or if you're confused about certain deadlines, because definitely it's very easy in a virtual world to have so many deadlines that you lose track of where you are, and then suddenly you have a deadline to catch up with and you're like, oh no, what do I do with that? So it's if you keep up with your deadlines, it'll be a lot easier to maintain like your information and be able to do it at a slower pace and to have more information retained, I would think. So just time management in general.
I always a struggle, but definitely in the pandemic, time management seems a lot harder. Wonderful. So another question I have is, why would you recommend that students present at ARC or another local conference? So JC, I believe you've presented at, I know you have actually, presented at the Sigma Tau Delta, and Sonali, you presented at GRC, so our regional conference. So JC, can you tell us why would you recommend, let's say, a local conference over a national conference?
I did my regional conference first and then did my national conference. And it's so much like more comforting to be speaking in front of people you know personally. And, you know, like the question part is probably you never know what people are going to ask. And, or like if people are even going to ask you questions, honestly. But at the local conference, you know, like the people who are there for you are going to make sure you get questions asked, and like maybe if you get stumped, they can like come in and help you if they need to. And just having that reassurance at like your first conference is always nice. And then it helps you build up and build your confidence until you're ready to go and present your research with the bigger people.
Okay, great. Sonali, how about you? You kind of did the same thing. You went to a regional conference first, it sounds like.
Yes, I would say very similar things. It helps to prepare more for like nationally, I would say, and like she said, it is more more personal in a way because you are in a closer group. So I would say very similar advice for that, or like words about that as well.
And so we've designed the annual research conference to be a little bit more low key in some ways. We also think of it as a teaching experience. So abstracts are due tomorrow, don't forget, for ARC. We will review your abstracts and we give everyone feedback regardless of, accepted or not. We do try to accept almost every one that comes in, but we think of it as a teaching moment so that we can give you feedback on your abstract and make sure that you're presenting some really strong research. So remember that as you get your feedback, I would say. It's all there just to help you become a stronger writer and to make sure that you're presenting yourself really professionally and academically online. Sure, your abstracts will be online on Digital Commons. So we give you lots of feedback on how you can make it stronger. And then the conference itself, again, that's what we're hoping is that, you'll do ARC and gain lots of confidence and get hooked. A lot of students, I think, get hooked on conferences after the first one or two and they want to do more. And so that's our hope with ARC is you get hooked and then you go on to your next conference, which could be regional or national or even international. We've had students do international conferences recently. We had a student last year who won a Kirka grant to go to Hawaii to present her research, which was kind of cool. And another one received a grant to go to Japan, which was also cool. Unfortunately, COVID canceled it, he couldn't, but excitement was there. So yeah, that's how we design ARC. We do want it to be really affirmative and helpful, and a learning moment for you all, a teaching moment, I guess, for us. Any questions about ARC in general, especially since the abstracts are due on Friday? Rachel, is yours already in your abstract?
It is not. I am finalizing it with my mentor this tomorrow afternoon.
Wonderful. We have about 25 abstracts submitted so far. We're expecting about 100. I can tell you from every single year we've run this, we get the majority the day before, up until that midnight deadline. So we're humans. I think humans always wait until the very last minute to submit things. So you're great. You're not behind at all. Just a question. Kat, how about you? Is yours almost ready to go? I think she's in our chat. Maybe not. Okay, well, that's really what we wanted to get to, is just tips, tricks, overviews, and to give you a little information about what the conference itself is going to look like. So I wanted to give everybody a moment if you have any questions, if this has brought up any ideas that you want to ask about, or Jason and Sonali, if you have any last minute, like, oh yeah, this is the one thing that I really wish I'd done that I'm totally going to do this time. One thing I would remind everybody of is, and JC mentioned this, but do practice before you present. I can tell you I do this a lot myself. So this is pot calling the kettle black sometimes, but I'm an English professor. We notoriously have very long, fancy terms for things. Sometimes people say they're made up. I swear they're not. But I will have read it 100 times and never said it out loud. And if I don't read my paper before I actually give it, I will stumble over that word. So it's always a good idea to read your essay or your paper or your presentation out loud before you actually do it, to make sure you can accurately pronounce that word that you've read a million times and written a million times, but never actually pronounced. I would say, Sonali, the same is probably true in biology with some of those long, yeah, definitely. That's my one big tip, is make sure you practice a little bit. Any other tips, tricks, questions?
I was going to say something on something we talked about earlier, and people turning their cameras on or turning them off. Some people do think it's distracting, so they automatically turn their camera off. So if you would like to see people's faces, maybe you can ask them to turn them on before you present. But I mean, if you prefer them to turn it off, you can ask them to turn it off as well.
That's actually a really good point. It's something we could ask as the ARC committee. We could put it in our instructions for moderators to ask about cameras. It's a great idea, JC. Rachel, did you have a question, comment?
Yes, ma'am. Question for the panelists. Ultimately, everybody's major and their presentation is different, but what made you choose the format that you chose for your presentation? What was like the defining difference that made you choose your format?
For me, my first conference, the deadline snuck up on me, not gonna lie, and all I had was a paper, so I just submitted my paper and then I read my paper. But I will say that I really do like PowerPoint presentations, like to go along with the paper. And when the people, since I'm English, it's usually a paper or a PowerPoint. I guess it could be a poster, but I like being able to see something and people having pictures to help explain that, and I think that's really cool. So if I was going to do another one besides paper, it would definitely be a PowerPoint or something.
Oh, I did I did post a presentation because we were discussing it with my research mentor, and we decided it would be like a best choice for our specific research because we are only getting started on it. So it would be best to do that right now and during this time specifically. So that was the main point for our presentation choice.
Yeah, I think these are definitely the right answers. I think there's a lot is discipline. So the humanities tend to do more PowerPoints and they tend to do more oral presentations, whereas sciences tend to do more posters. I think to Sonali's point also, earlier research a lot of times ends up being a poster, and then later research is extended into an oral presentation. For me, it took me a long time to figure out how to do posters as an English professor. You know, we talk about books, so there's not a whole lot of things to put on a poster that's an image. But I ended up doing some research with the GIS program, and we had lots of maps we could use. And so for the research where we worked with maps, we would do posters, because then we suddenly had something that we could put up that it was actually easier to see. You know, it's easier to see that as a poster than it was to talk about it. So I think you want to think about the content of what you're presenting, and if it's easier to see it visually and talk through it, or if it's easier to talk through it, you know, more at a leisurely pace. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah. The other thing that I always remind students to is comfort level. So if this is your first conference, comfort level wise, recording a poster is probably going to be the least nerve-wracking thing. Posters can be less nerve-wracking if you are more of like a people person, you want that conversation, that back and forth. With posters, typically you're doing a 3 to 5 minute overview of your presentation, but you do have to be sort of an extrovert. You have to grab people and bring them to your poster, right? And then you have to engage with them and talk to them. So it's less rehearsed, and it's more just an easy back and forth, if that makes sense. And if that's your personality, it is a great, great fit for you. Sometimes, you know, I don't want to go out and have these leisurely conversations. I'd rather just hold forth. Now, the paper itself does require a little bit more preparation, in that you have that 10 to 12 minutes that you have to fill. You're basically holding forth on your topic. And then at the very end, there are the questions. So in some ways, more and less nerve-wracking, right? You're not doing that constant talking about your project over and over, and you're not doing that constant answering of questions, but there is that build up to like, here's my 12 minutes. They've all heard everything I have to say, and now I'm gonna gird myself for the questions, right? So there is that sort of buildup of nervousness. Again, I will say questions at ARC and local conferences tend to be geared just to get to know more about you and your project. So we just are curious. I think by nature, faculty, you know, our faculty are super curious. Other students are curious, and they just want to learn more. It is very rare, especially in a local conference, that someone is out to, you know, try to show that you don't know enough about your subject. They literally just want to know more. So that's a good thing to kind of keep in the back of your head is we just want to know more. It's also great when you get those questions, because you can kind of grow your projects, and people will ask a question you don't know the answer to, and you'll say, aha, well, maybe I can learn more about that and grow my project a little bit. So from more of, I guess, psychological perspective, maybe that's the breakdown on the two that I see as well. So I guess sum up, there's no right or wrong. Just it's a personal decision on poster versus oral presentation. And then JC's right too, oral presentation can mean just reading a paper, or it can mean a PowerPoint. Again, in the English department, we are kind of super boring, I guess, in that a lot of times we just read our papers. We don't have a PowerPoint. I remember the first time I did a Prezi at a conference, it was kind of mind-blowing, because no one had done Prezis in my field, right? And they're like, what is that? Because we're used to just discussing our paper. But again, it's all disciplines have different conventions. Okay. Any other final questions or comments? Well, thank you, Rachel and Kat, for joining us. We really appreciate it. Rachel, I saw your chat. I'm glad it was helpful. We're always here to offer any feedback, and I'm sure JC and Sonali wouldn't mind questions if you have any. What's your discipline, might I ask?
I'm in psychology.
Oh, so you're in that interesting sort of intersection between humanities and, yeah, the socials. Yes. So I bet you do have a lot of decisions to make. Fantastic. All right. And Kat, I know you are in GIS, so I'm expecting that you may end up with a poster as well, or you may end up with an oral presentation. We've seen both from the GIS department. All right. Thank you, JC and Sonali, for sharing your expertise as well. I think it's helpful to hear from students who've been there, done that. All right. And JC's left her email in the chat if anybody would like to chat further. And we will call it a day. Thank you all for attending. I'll stay on the line in case anyone has specific questions. Have a great afternoon.